We're going to get started because we do have a lot of information to go through. Just to be clear, this is not a Hooksett School Board meeting. This is just a meeting with two Hooksett School Board members. My name is David Pearl. This is John Liskars, and we're both Hooksett School Board members. The reason that we called this meeting is there are a lot of things on the table right now that the Hooksett School Board has been considering and has done. And we felt that it was important to share that with the public, and more importantly, to get your input as far as how you feel about some of these things that are happening right now. I'm going to have to look this way a little bit. So for tonight, what we're planning to do is I'm going to go over the Manchester Agreement, and then we're going to have an open discussion. We have a wireless mic here. It's no time limits. If you'd like to speak, we'll just hand it around. There's, if you want to ask questions, you can. If you want to just make a comment, we're not really looking at any format here. We're just hoping to have a nice open discussion. When we finish that discussion, we'll move on to JCB and the Londonderry MOU. The MOU from Londonderry is the only one that's been made public, so that's the only one that we can really discuss. And then again, we'll have a discussion. And then the Pinkerton contract will go right into discussion because there is absolutely no data that we have that we can share about the Pinkerton contract at this time. And then we'll kind of end up with a general discussion if we have time. We have some information about transportation and some other issues if people are still up for it when we get there. So with that, I will see if I can get started here. So the Manchester Agreement, which was finalized on July 30th. Oh yeah. So everything that's up here, you should have a copy or been able to pick up a copy from the desk if you want to look at it. The way that I structured my presentation here is I'm going to show the full text, and then the next screen I'm going to show my highlighted points from that text, so that it's kind of an all or nothing. I had tried it before, so yeah, there's no way to split them up, unfortunately. So this agreement was signed on July 30th of 2013, and this first couple phrases here is the whereas page, and my takeaway from that was that it's an agreement between Manchester and Hooksett. The 20-year agreement started in 2003. All students had to go to Hooksett or had to go to Manchester except on case-by-case basis, and Manchester was to provide the education. So that's basically what is stipulated in all of those lines. And as you probably know, if you were following any of the issues, the case-by-case is what became the big issue and what that meant. Here we have just more whereases, and basically that is that Manchester filed suit against us. It stipulates that it's easier to settle and we want to have a good relationship, and that this document will settle all claims. So these are three real important parts of the agreement and what happened. Manchester filed suit against us because they didn't believe that we had the right to send students to other schools on a case-by-case basis, as we were doing. At the time, parents were allowed to file under JCB. They had to be accepted by the school of their choice. They had to provide transportation to that school, and if so, they filed with the school board, and we would approve them, and we would do that on a one-at-a-time or case-by-case basis. We approved about 70 such students last school year, and well, I felt that we were in the right to do that. Manchester disagreed, and they filed suit in Superior Court. The next one, it's easier to settle, and we want to have a good relationship. Of course it is easier to settle. Nobody wanted a protracted battle. But I think what's more important there is it states that we want to have a good relationship. And I, for one, do want to have a good relationship with Manchester. There's too much history. There's too many people that want to stay there to start ignoring Manchester and saying that it's something that we have to totally abandon. And that this settles all claims. So in other words, this would settle our claim against them, their claim against us. And now we get into the therefores. And the first three are here. And basically it means that in the settling of all claims, that Hooksett will withdraw its breach claim. This settles all claims, and Manchester removes its suit, and each will pay the lawyer cost. So basically, this means that we had to just forget about everything that we had gone through about class sizes or any of the complaints that we had to give those up, and they were going to remove their suit about case by case. And we have 6 more here. And this states that the contract will end June 30th, 2014. So right now, we are still under the contract that started back in 2003, and we will remain there until June 30th of this year. So really, all of the stipulations that are in that contract are still in force now, and our tuition has not been affected yet, other than it would be affected by the normal course. And what I mean by that is that we are given an estimated number of tuition costs at the beginning of the year, and we're given a final calculated number at the end of the year. So our tuition this year will actually be up to almost $9,000. Is that right, John? Yeah, I think it went up about 700. We were at 85 estimate. I think it might have went up to 92. We just got the final bill. So when you see that it went up this year, that would be part of the normal 2003 contract, not what happened in the agreement. Hooksett's going to pay the 5 years of capital cost of $798,000 a year. The capital cost was created back in 2003 when we signed a 20-year contract. At that time, there were a shortage of seats in Manchester, and Central was headed for a big renovation. So part of the deal was that we would basically bond with them to do the renovation on Central, and I believe there was some other money that might have gone to West, but the majority was that major underground parking lot and all the renovations that Central went through. So the capital cost stayed at about this cost throughout the contract. Since it's a bond number, it changes a little bit depending on principal and so forth. This was a big point in the breach claim, because if we had been successful with breach, the capital cost would have stopped. So we would not have paid that number any longer. So it had to be addressed in the agreement. The way it was addressed in the agreement was that they would freeze the number from this year, and that number would continue out for 5 years. So, and that is when this agreement ends in 2018. So when we hear about the tuition costs that we're paying Manchester, we really, to get the total cost, need to factor in that we're paying almost another $800,000 per this agreement. And Manchester decided, well, Manchester's part of the agreement was that we could send our kids anywhere we wanted, and they would not challenge that. So this meant that we could continue, not only continue our practice, but those 70 kids that had been sent to various schools were not going to be challenged. So we weren't going to have to worry about kids that went to Londonderry and Pembroke and Bow and so forth currently in this year. And here we have 7 through 9 of the therefores. Okay. So this gets into our current requirements of what we need to be doing now. We're supposed to provide Manchester with an estimate of the number of kids that are going to go there next year by December 1st of this year. There was a motion made at the previous school board meeting that we survey the 8th grade to find out so that we could comply with the contract, and the school board voted that motion down. So as it stands right now, we have no plan to provide an estimate to Manchester. So we will be having a meeting tomorrow night, and hopefully we're going to develop some type of plan, because my concern was this is really our first milestone in the agreement, and I don't want to miss it. I don't want us to miss our responsibilities on our side of the agreement. And then the tuition contract sets forth the tuition amounts for the next 5 years. Well, including this year. This year there's no change. And then as you can see there, 10.2, 10.4, 10.6, and 10.8. Those numbers are considerably higher than what our estimate was for this year. As the estimated cost is coming up, that is narrowing a little bit. The nice part about these numbers is, at least that starting next year, there will be no estimated and final cost. This is the exact cost that we are going to pay Manchester, regardless of what it costs them to educate their kids. And just to back up a little on the estimated and the actual, the way that's calculated is that Manchester sends all of its information to the Department of Education, what it costs, what they're paying for all their different things. They have to take out transportation since we don't utilize that. And then the Department of Ed sends them back a number. And that number is what we pay. So it is not a number that Manchester can just come up with on their own. They have to provide the data for it. And this year it was quite a jump. In the past, I think it's only been maybe $100 or $200, and this year it was $700. So quite an impact. And the number 9 says that there's going to be no change in special ed. In most of these, in this agreement and most of the other things that we're going to talk about tonight, special ed is really segregated out. It's its own thing. It is so federally mandated that there are not really too many agreements that we can make to change that cost or alter it at all. So in most cases you'll see that there's really no effect on it. And this is 10 through 12. So number 10 was a big debate on the school board. Number 10 states that before June 30th of 2016, we will negotiate in good faith with Manchester. And it also, in the statement there, says, you know, based on our 100-year relationship and some other things there. Question came up, if we sign a restrictive contract with another school that only allows a small portion of our children to have a choice to go somewhere other than that new school, can we go to Manchester in good faith and negotiate to send them kids? And what number, I guess, would constitute good faith? To me, I was concerned because they mentioned the 100-year history. So if you're going to do something in good faith based on your 100-year history, well, our 100-year history is we've sent about, 85% of our kids there. So this still remains an issue on the school board of what that good faith negotiation will look like. And then there are the two $100,000 payments. These just kind of appeared in the agreement. There is no, we've asked for clarification about what this number is based on, and we've gotten nothing. So we had to change our budget this year to come up with $100,000, and we have to add $100,000 to next year's budget to comply with this agreement. And the last one is that not only did we have to agree with this, in Manchester, but the Superior Court had to agree, because since Manchester had brought this into Superior Court, this became their matter, and they are the ones that asked us to go into mediation, and this is how this agreement was reached, was through mediation. We actually never argued the case in court, but came to a mutual agreement through mediation. So this is just kind of a little wrap-up of what happened. The Hooksett School Board received the first view of the contract at 4 p.m. on July 30th. That was one day before it was voted on. And at that time, we were told that it was confidential. This posed some problems for me, as you can imagine. The next day at 4 p.m., we met with the attorney. 2 board members asked for public hearing before the vote. That was myself and Mr. Lisgards. We were almost, at that point, honestly, not interested in the details of the contract because it became very apparent that we were going to walk in out of that room into this room and vote this thing in. And we were saying, let's have a continuance with the court and let's have a public hearing and sort this thing out and see what's really in it. That didn't happen, and at 7 o'clock that night, that was the vote that we took. And now we have a contract with Manchester, well, we have an agreement at this point with Manchester. The financial impact, shortly after the agreement was made public, myself and Mr. Liskars asked twice to have the administration prepare a financial impact to let the people know what this was going to cost now that we had already agreed to it. I think that report would have been better served before we voted, but we had no choice. Twice the board voted this down. So there have been a lot of numbers floating around as far as how people add this up and what they come up with. Unfortunately, those numbers are criticized and people say, people are guessing, but the problem is we have no official number at this point, which I think we should have had. So that brings us to September, when we receive a letter from our attorney, and he is basically telling us that this settlement should be filed with the DOE to become a tuition contract, because it has a lot of the key components of a tuition contract. Now, this threw me for a loop, because my understanding of a tuition contract is that it has to be voted on by the voters. Anything that's going to bind the school district for more than 1 year has to be voted on by the voters, not just the school board. So that's why when you'll see a bond issue, if we wanted to go out and buy a new tractor to plow the snow or something like that, if we were going to have to bond that for more than 1 year, that would have to go on the warrant article, and the voters would have to approve it. If it's something that we could pay for in 1 year, we could just go ahead and do it and say, no, we won't have a warrant article. So that was the first question, was how does this really become a tuition contract unless the voters vote on it? And we were told it just will. Yes. No, I don't think we do have that one here, but it is public. Okay, so
we can get that out for you if it's not out.
Yeah, I threw this one in at the last minute, and John didn't make a copy. So this is the second part of the letter, and so basically what it says is, if we take this settlement and we send it up to the DOE, that Manchester will become a high school maintained by Hooksett. And that is really the terminology for a school that's under contract. We throw around school of record, anchor school, all these different terms, but the legal term is that it's a high school maintained by, and in this case, Hooksett. So one might ask, why do you go to court, fight against Manchester, come to an agreement that costs you a lot of money, and now you want to take that settlement and make it into a 4-year agreement, a 4-year contract? And the letter clearly states, so that parents won't be able to choose which high school they send their children to. This is because if a district is without a school that's maintained by it, under New Hampshire law, parents can come to the school board and say, I want my child to go to public school X. And the school board will pay the tuition for public school X. We don't have to provide transportation, but if we were, we would have to do it equally. But New Hampshire state law says we don't have to provide transportation for high school, but we have to, if we do, we're going to do it on an equal basis. So this was a fear, I believe. Well, I'm going to back up. I'm not going to say that. This letter was prompted by the attorney himself, which concerned me, because nobody on the school board had said, gosh, we better change this thing into a contract. And I don't know if I have the vote on that one. Yes. So this would create a 4-year tuition contract with Manchester. Manchester would be maintained by us. And Manchester will take all of our students, but Hooksett is not obligated to send any. So this posed kind of a question for me because I thought the will of this board was to break the contract with Manchester. And here we were now going back and making a 4-year contract, and I was kind of concerned about how that would affect us having a contract with yet another school. Those questions were not answered. Again, this was brought up, we voted on it, and well, it was 3-2. So I thought I had a slide for that. So that is basically the Manchester agreement. Before we move on to the next subject, what we'd like to do is, if there's any questions, comments about Manchester, we'd like to have you voice those. And like I said, this is just going to be an open discussion, so if you'd like the microphone, just raise your hand.
Yeah. Those you don't know me, I'm Steve Mandeville. I live on Stearns Ave. I have a daughter. My 3 older children are all graduates of Manchester schools and have done well in life. My son's in 7th grade here, and our wish is that he attends West High School. Unfortunately, his year of graduation is 2019. At this point in time, is he or is he not going to be able to go to West High School?
Well,
He's running a year behind with your agreement. I think he said it goes through 2018.
I would say at this time there's no way to guarantee that because we only have an agreement through 2018, and by 2016 we should have negotiated with them in good faith, and I guess the result of that would decide. There is one other option that could happen as we get into MOUs. There is, as we are going to talk about later, we are looking at memorandums of understandings with other schools that we don't have full-blown contracts with. So that would be another possibility if the contract was not extended.
Test one. My name is Mike Boucher. I asked a lot of questions at one of the school board meetings about financial. I mean, my figuring is about $5.5 million is what we're getting charged by Manchester. And one of my fears was, let's say we go to Pinkerton, the will of the board wants to go there, but the town votes it down. Now we're sitting there with this large amount of money that's not in the warrant article. How does that affect K-8?
Sure. So the question is basically, what happens if the school board adopts Pinkerton contract and then in March the voters voted down? Yeah. We just got some information on this at the very last school board meeting, kind of inadvertently from the financial director. I was shocked. I have asked for legal opinion on this for a month or two. I guess one's coming. According to the director, the financial director, the school board can bind the school for 1 year. So that theory would say that the school board can vote for the Pinkerton contract under the terms that it's a 10-year contract. So from the time they vote it until March, it is the contract of the Hooksett School District. Then, if the voters vote no, it's done. So, as you can imagine, this poses a new set of possibilities. Because if you assign, as you're going there forever, or 10 years, and the voters voted down, do we now have one large class that's going to go into Pinkerton? Are we going to provide transportation? And are we going to follow that through? We haven't had a chance to discuss it. This, like I said, it came out, we were having a discussion about something, and this was offered. Up until this point, it had seemed to be nobody really knew, or I had also heard that we couldn't assign them. So there's a lot of things, but that was the most information I've got.
Just real quick, the discussion we were having was about the number of students that we're going to budget for. That's where the financial discussion was.
You're right.
Because we don't always budget at 100% of the number of Hooksett students. But there was so much up in the air right now that they decided to budget for 100% of the students of Hooksett. And then the question came up, well, about assignments and everything, and that's where I think what Dave is alluding to, that Karen, the financial administrator, leaked, if you will, or...
And just to explain what John said about budgeting for 100, historically, there's always been a certain amount of 8th graders that go out of the public system, either to Trinity or other private schools which we don't contribute to. So the budget committee started applying a little pressure about 3 years ago to say, wait a minute, school district, why are you factoring that 100 kids are going to go to high school in your budget when we know historically they're not? So they lowered that number to about 96%, and then they keep doing a historical average. But this year, the board voted to go up to 100 because of all the turmoil. We don't know if that trend is going to hold. We don't know if some kids could come out of Trinity now and want to go to some other school. So we thought it was going to be safer to go to 100 in the budget. But let me just throw in one positive thing that also happened. I believe it was myself that made the motion. The school board has agreed that any additional tuition money that is budgeted this year that is not spent on tuition will go back to the taxpayers. So we are not going to fund balance spend tuition money, and we're not going to shift it out of the tuition line, which the board has every right to do that. Personally, I don't like that practice, but they do have that right. This year, this board agreed not to do it. Let me just give a caveat that in March, the board will change. We're hoping that the next board will follow through with the promise that this board has made, but this sitting board can only make promises till the March election. The next board can do whatever they would like to do.
And just a little follow-up with what David said about that 100% funding number of students. We also voted for that because the data shows us, if you look at the enrollments for Trinity, and I think it was Bishop Brady was the other non-public high school, you can see last year, because all of a sudden a bunch of choices were available, those numbers in some of the schools went down to 0. And you saw the increases at some of the other schools like Londonderry, Pembroke, increase. So that's why we supported them funding 100%, because the data is showing us that. Okay, Mike's got another question?
I just, my main question is, when the 2003 contract was passed, that was obviously a warrant article, correct, that the town voted on. Well, this increase of, I'm figuring $5.5 million, it might be, might have different numbers. It wasn't a warrant article. So I understand there's increases, we want to fund it, but that's an expense. And we've been working on default budgets. So what happens if the budget committee decides, because the town doesn't want the increase, if this wasn't warranted, we're not going to give you the money? Where is that $1 million going to come from? It's going to come from your budget? If it does, then the school board now has to come up with $1 million, and the tuition is an expense. You can't get rid of that. So it's got to get hit somewhere.
I can tell you exactly where it's going to come from, Mike. Your taxes, because it's in the default budget. A default budget is set up to cover all contractual agreements that the district has.
Okay.
The minute the court put the stamp on that settlement, we owned it. And so we have no choice. Another interesting fact that we just found out at the last meeting, not only that, but if the school board adopts the Pinkerton contract, there seems to be legal standing that that will be in the default budget as well. I was surprised because I thought it was the contractual agreements that you had going into the budget, but if they could get it passed before the budget closes, before we send the budget off, then that would be in the default budget. So basically before the first of the year, if it passes. And just to fill everybody in, a default budget is, if you vote no on the proposed budget, you will have the default budget. So I think it's hard to say that the budget is not going to go up. I mean, unless there were drastic cuts to offset it, and I agree with Mike's number, about 5.5 million. The only thing that I think may skew that is Manchester has had a big increase this year. So it all depends when you're talking about an increase, what you're basing it on. When I factored mine, I looked at 5 years of Manchester going up $200 a year. Well, this year they went up $700. So that would narrow that gap. Wouldn't change the amount of money, I mean, but it would just say if you were comparing the increase from what we used to pay. But yeah, I factored about at least like 1.1, 1.2 million a year that we're paying more now. And let me throw in one other development. I don't know if we're going to get to it later, but while we're talking about this, all the other schools that we do shared tuition with, Pinkerton, not Pinkerton, well, Wynn Pinkerton is not a contract, Londonderry, Pembroke, Bow, Hooksett pays the base tuition rate. They always paid the base tuition rate based on Manchester. So the minute we signed the Manchester agreement, all the tuitions in those other ones went up. But at our last meeting, we went further than that. They decided to change the base rate to the Pinkerton rate, which we don't even know yet, but is projected to be about 10.4. I've heard 10.45. So expect to pay more. John and I voted to leave it at the Manchester rate. We thought historically this district has always paid the Manchester rate to other districts, and that was a fair thing to do, and it was a known factor because we have guaranteed 4 years of tuition numbers from Manchester. Parents could plan based on what those schools were charging. Now that number is floating, and it's got to cost more because we know Pinkerton is more than 10.2. They're at 10.29 right now, and this is going to be next year's number, so at least a couple more $100.
Does anybody have questions?
So here's my situation. I have a daughter in 8th grade, and I wrote a letter to you guys and Dr. Littlefield in September because I know I want her to go to Manchester next year. You and John wrote me back. I appreciate it. I heard back from nobody else. So as you stated, if Manchester is our contract as of today, when is the board going to make a decision that my kid can go to Manchester? I don't see why I have to wait if that's the contract that's here right now. And
Personally, I would agree with you.
right, I
Now,
know
to
that.
try to get an idea of how this could work out. The question was asked, what if a district has 2 high schools that it maintains? So if you think about it, well, Manchester's a perfect example. They have really 4 now. But they have criteria in place. You know, if you live in a certain place in Manchester, you go to West, in a certain place you go to Central. MST has its own criteria in Memorial. So I guess my opinion would be, at this moment, we only have 1 high school of record. We only have 1 maintained high school. The board has decided to put off these decisions.
Has anyone asked the lawyer, like, aren't you bound to that contract at this point? And if a student, and I know a lot of students that want to go to Manchester next year, and they just think they're going to be able to. So, at what point do you get off the pot as a board and make this decision?
Yes, we did discuss it with the lawyer. I can't go into too much of it, not that it's really super secret, but we just can't violate confidential conversation, so I'm going to be a little careful about that. Yes, John?
So one thing we can share, though, is something that was said by the superintendent in public. And I think he described it in a perfect scenario. We talked about this one night. The perfect scenario, all students would be assigned to Pinkerton, and then there would be a process where the parents would take a form, and they'd fill out, and they'd have on the form a list, Manchester, Bow, Londonderry, Pembroke, where do you want your child to go? And you'd submit that form. So that was just described as a perfect process or a favorable process. I don't remember what the words were. Is that going to be the will of this board? We don't know yet because they haven't finalized that criteria. How are we going to do this?
Okay.
So that's one possible scenario that's been thrown out.
And this will be in March, after the vote?
No, this would be before March. This would
Well-
occur.
Yeah, Mr. Liskars and I have been asking that all these criterias be in place before the board votes on a contract. That's bringing us to tomorrow night. And we have tried this before. We have drawn maps and tried to figure out, are we going to give more weight to people that live closer? Or are we going to do, you know, is it if you have siblings, if you have history?
But we don't even know if Pinkerton's putting a number on this contract yet.
Well, we don't. What we were assuming was the information that Dr. Littlefield made public in the very beginning. And that information was that a certain amount would be allowed not to go. So on that basis, I thought, you know, we should now pursue criteria. The other criteria we have is, as we're going to get into these MOUs, the MOUs are going to allow, like a certain school, like Londonderry can say, okay, this year we can take X amount of kids. Well, in Hooksett, we've got to decide how we're going to pick those kids. Yeah, if X is 30 and there's only 20 kids, we're okay. But do we wait till 29 to start enforcing the criteria? You know, these are decisions that John and I have said need to be made now and not wait until we have adopted a contract and try to figure it out after.
So David, I think what we're starting to do here is we're floating into
Right.
MOUs and everything. I wonder if it's a good time we should just proceed through the rest of the data that we have and then come back around.
This gentleman had a question right here.
Mine
Yeah.
has to do with the MOUs.
Okay.
I've heard, and I guess I'm looking for confirmation or denial, that the Hooksett School Board cannot make the criteria with an MOU. Because once you do that, it becomes a contract. And you don't have authority, they're not going to be contracts.
I've heard the exact same thing. And we are floating into it, but if there's interest. The first question I ask, well, what's the difference between a MOU and a contract? Because, you know, an MOU can be for 5 years. Why don't the voters have to vote on it? There are certain conditions that can't be put into that MOU or it automatically becomes a contract. My understanding was an MOU has to be initiated by the parent, has to be accepted by the receiving school. We can promote that idea. We could have a high school fair here and say, you know, bring your wares and show them, you know, to all our students. We could do that. But I don't believe that we can choose. But I am not, you know, we are not the majority of the board, and that is yet to be determined. So I do not think, like if we go back to JCB, it was the same thing. JCB, the parents requested to go to a school, the school had the criteria, and that was it. Now, the criteria is in a contract. And one of the benefits is that it says that, you know, you have to accept all of our students, there's no testing. But I don't believe that we can restrict on our end. I guess time is going to tell. I agree.
Some schools are already saying, well,
There is a lot of information out there. There's more information out there than what I can give you, to tell you the truth.
Hey Dave, Tom Cody, 246 West River Road. I just want to follow up on Mike's question about K through 8, whether that money's going to come out of K through 8. I believe it will if we don't vote for the budget that's proposed, because the default budget is lower, right?
Not necessarily.
No? How does that work then?
A default budget is calculated based on your contractual agreements. Teacher's contract, heating costs for the building, you know, all of these factors that it took us to run the school for the previous year. It's a state formula, no one-times. You know, if we had last year bought the new snowplow for the yard, well, we can't say we need one of those every year. So what happens is that default is a number. Then we propose a number, the budget committee takes a whack at it, and that number becomes a proposed budget. It can be higher or lower than the default, and we have had years where it's lower. So we could end up with, so I guess I should back up on my other statement and say it absolutely is there. It would be in the default, but the town could pass a budget that was lower than default, which did not include that $1 million. So I will retract that statement that says it's absolutely there. It's not.
When you go to vote, you know what the default budget is, though, the number's there, right?
Yes, it's in the
And
warrant.
the proposed budget is there.
Yes.
So if the default budget is $1.2 million lower than the budget, hypothetically, and the budget gets voted down, you go to the default, that 1.2 million has to come out of Hooksett. Because everything else goes, you know, your tuition for your high school students has to go to the surrounding towns. So you're getting hit K through 8, right?
Yes, in that scenario, I think you might have misspoke on one. If the town voted for a proposed budget that was lower than default, if the proposed budget was lower than default, then we would have to make up that high school tuition from something existing in the budget.
Right.
Which K-8 is the only thing really left, because we don't have any variable cost in high school. I mean, we just pay the tuition and that's it, and that's all contractual.
Right.
We can't lower the teacher's pay. You know, that's all contractually obligated. So
Right.
you're really going down and down to what you can take from.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hadn't thought about that scenario of having the proposed budget be lower, but it certainly can happen.
I just wanted to refer back to this gentleman's question about, I have 3 kids. One graduated from West, 2 are at West now. They got, you know, they're getting an excellent education there. I think you should probably email the superintendent in Manchester. I wouldn't bother with these guys personally, but no offense. You know me, Dave. And see what she says about. I wouldn't not send your kids there. I can't imagine that going into your senior year they're going to tell you no. You know.
The timer just went off.
Yeah. Oh, can I have another 10 seconds? All right. So as far as the new agreement with Manchester and the old contract, I'm a little unsure as to where the old contract ended and the new agreement began. I know that we have the new agreement being those 10 things. Is that added on to the other contract, or is that contract totally?
The 2003 agreement will end June 30th of this year.
Right.
The only thing from the new agreement that comes into this year is that it's stated by December 1st of this year we would give them an estimate about next year. That's really the only thing that affects this current year from the new contract. So then on July 1st, we will have ended the 2003 agreement. We'll be under the 4-year tuition agreement with Manchester.
Right.
And that has to be done by December?
Okay.
No, and let me back up. The other thing that came into that is we had to pay them $100,000 this year. And no, that by December 1st, what we're supposed to do is give them an estimate of how many kids are going to Manchester. And then by March 31st, we have to give them a hard number. So those are 2 things that we have to do this year. We haven't come up with an estimate yet, and but we have paid we've reallocated the budget for the $100,000. I don't know if the check went out, but we did have to do that out of this year's budget.
Okay. Now, my real question is, the old contract or the existing contract that's going to end at the end of the school year. We could have a representative from Hooksett attend school board meetings and committee meetings, non-voting, but as I've said, it's better to have representation. At least, you know, even it was only a half a vote anyway, so that you would have gotten. So, do we still have that?
No.
No, that's gone. So, okay.
And the biggest thing, which you reminded me of, which you probably forgot, we also lost the right to choose West versus
Right,
Central.
no, I haven't forgotten
Okay,
that.
I thought that was...
I think that should have been a deal breaker for this agreement right there, was to let Manchester be able to, I mean, they could, after this year, they could tell kids from Central, you gotta go to West or go somewhere else. I think you burn those kids.
I told Tom...
Not that they're gonna probably do that, but you know.
I told Tom after the vote, he brought that up to me, and I admitted to him that in this 24-hour period that I had to vote against this agreement, that did not cross my mind. And that, to me, is the importance of a public hearing. Tom is focused on that. In 24 hours, I didn't think about that. And had I thought about that, we could have discussed it as a board. That's why I believe the public hearings need to happen, because everybody has different situations and they look at things differently. Just, we're on the school board, but boy, there's just a lot of things going around, so.
Just one more point, and
The
then I'll.
superintendent did make a statement, though, from Manchester that she didn't foresee a problem keeping kids at the school, so in fairness.
Yeah, well, she indicated, but they're gonna have to be coming out with a redistricting plan in next March, I believe, and no, you don't think so?
No, they will, but they won't.
They won't change anything there. Yeah. I think they'd be crazy too, because.
Well, they won't change anything for Hooksett. They may change stuff within the city, given
Within-
what's just
yeah.
been proposed for West,
Yeah.
but they won't do anything with Hooksett.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to, so the tuition this year for kids going to Manchester is $9,200 as opposed to what we thought all along was gonna be $8,500, is that what?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is that a direct result of anything that's happened here, or is
That-
that just?
That had nothing to do with the new contract. I would think it had to do with that Manchester put money into their system, because that calculation is based on the amount of money Manchester spends to educate their children. And they don't always know that until the end of the year. So they give an estimate, and then they do this formula, and then they come up with the final payment.
Seems like it went up a lot more than it's
This seemed,
historically been going up.
yeah, and we asked the superintendent, he thought it was historically, it was a jump. Like I said, I thought about 200. If you look at the Manchester's 4-year agreement, they're increasing us 200 a year. So that 200 a year number was always kind of a common number. So to see 700, yeah, that was a big jump.
Does anybody else have any questions before we move forward? Mike's got another one.
Now that we're talking about this, did anyone ask if they put their legal fees to fight this into their school budget that possibly would raise that amount?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't
They
know
have
if
to pay
legal
for the
fees are
school.
counted in that. Rich Gerard might know.
Manchester paid $52,000 to fight the
Okay.
settlement.
This is Rich Gerard, radio host from Manchester, Gerard at Large.
Yes, and I got that on a right-to-know request, by the way.
But does that go into what gets submitted to the, with that
I,
rate, do you know?
I don't know, but at 52 grand on a $157 million budget, I think it's
Historically, I was in
justifiable.
the 9th grade in October 2001, 1970, when we moved here. I never had the good fortune to attend one of the Hooksett schools. But I remember my mother registered me for high school, and the superintendent back then, I think it was Mr. Cawley, the school's named after, said it was just a little over $1,000 a year. So all these years later, I don't think that's too bad, but I don't think everybody realizes too that you're setting on a time bomb with the tuition, which isn't the school board or the superintendent's fault. If you notice, building residential housing is picked up around Hooksett. Over the summer, you could have 20 high school kids move in here, and you got to find that money to pay them to wherever they're going to go to school. So this is always a floating number. I believe too with the kids that go on to the private schools that we talked about, they have to maintain a passing average. And if they do not, I believe they're dismissed. So they could come back, and I don't know if they get at the end of the first market period, second market period, if Manchester or anybody else would prorate this. So I mean, we have a real time bomb here, and you guys are, in a bad situation. You never really know what to plan for. You can guess and hope for the best. So.
And it was mentioned that even budgeting the high school students at 100% may not cover us for some of the reasons you just mentioned. That, we could go to more than 100% of the 8th grade class. You ready, John? Well, you can have this one if you like. Keep you from talking. I'll shut this one off.
So if you're sitting there and you're thinking,
Just to make an announcement.
go ahead.
We do have water and cookies over here provided by Mr. Liskar, so help yourself if you'd like.
And I just want to make a point, there are 2 types of cookies, because I believe in choice.
Those will do much better than eat the raisin cookies because they're much healthier than the chocolate chip, right, Joe?
But if you're sitting there and a question comes to mind about the Manchester contract, you know, this is a free-for-all, so just bring it up later. Well, you know, anything that comes to your mind tonight, just fire away. If we have an answer, we'll get it, and if it's something we need to ask the board, we'll do that too for you. So we're going to proceed on now, and we're going to just start talking a little bit about MOUs. Right now, the only public information available to MOUs is just happened to uncover a good Hooksett citizen brought it to my attention and said, geez, did you go on londonderry.org? They posted their MOU that the school board's going to be discussing. So sure enough, you go out there. It's coming up in another document. What I want to talk to you about, you know, somebody told me one time, you know, if you feed a man with fish or something like that, right, he'll eat for a day, but if you teach him to fish, my wife's got her head down, you know, they'll feed themselves forever. So all I wanted to do is show you kind of the process I follow, because just because I'm on the school board doesn't mean I always have all of the information. So the beauty about the internet these days, you can put a few names in and a few school names maybe and start searching. So some of these are just things that I came up with just by Googling. The first one was in Londonderry Times. This is one of the handouts you have. And I'll let you read it for yourself. And it's dated August 15th. So this is, you know, the time frame was in the summer. But what I thought was interesting about this one in the Londonderry Times, this is right around the time where the Manchester negotiated agreement came out. We just got done in court. And Superintendent Greenberg said, if the tuition for Manchester is 10.2, then that is what Londonderry will charge. And they quoted him, what Manchester is charging for the students is what we will ask, he said. The new agreement sets tuition for 2014-15, blah, blah, blah. That's what Mr. Pearl just went over. So that tells a lot. You know, that's the superintendent of Londonderry stating in public record what he is proposing for Londonderry, for Hooksett students. Now, does that mean that's what's going to come out in the final MOU? Nobody knows. But I just say that's on public record, is in August time frame, and we're now in November. And you're going to see shortly the MOU that Londonderry actually took a look at. So before we get to the MOU, for those that are familiar that come to school board meetings, they realize we have a policy called JCB. And on the table back there, I just happen to bring tonight, it's a blue book, I got it wide open. That's all of the Hooksett School Board policies that we have. Those are not electronically, those aren't online for you, unfortunately. Now, I have them on a website. If you go to hooksett.net and you look under Hooksett School Board, I've got them under there in a section called Policy. So if you ever want to search through the policies electronically, you can do that. I'm told by the SAU that we're going to have those available on a new website that's coming up supposedly this year. So that's good news. But for right now, they're in hard copy, and if you want to take a look at them, you can. But one of those policies is called HSD file JCB. And this is the policy that parents can use and have used this year, especially with what happened in Manchester. Some of the parents thought it was a little political that was going on. They weren't too sure, they felt unsure, and they started looking around to different schools. Now, historically, Hooksett has done this as long as this contract's been available, but the numbers have been relatively small. You know, we've got a few that go to Bow, a few go to Pembroke, a couple in Londonderry. Last year was fairly significant. We have the numbers of all the schools last year, but JCB is the policy that they used. And you can read it for yourself, but the key is you go to the school that your child is interested in, you ask them, do you have room? And if they said yes, and you know your child can come, then you go back to the Hooksett superintendent, you said, you know, we have a superintendent that says they have room, we'd like to go, we agree to pay the difference in tuition, that's different from the base tuition you pay to Manchester, and then you have to go before, that request has to go after the superintendent before the board, and the board votes on each child individually. And that was to meet the requirements of the case-by-case with the Manchester contract. So Hooksett always did that. But that was the contention, that was the argument between Hooksett and Manchester. So this is basically a policy that's still in place. Right now it has been, I don't want to call it suspended, that the board struggled with this one night, but what's the date, do you remember?
Tomorrow.
Is tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. So the board has suspended parents from using JCB until tomorrow.
Well, John, to be clear, they suspended making decisions on it.
Making
So I guess you
decisions.
could do the first part of it, but you just wouldn't get an answer until after the 19th.
Right, so you could go out, you could tour the schools, you could do your research, you could talk to the superintendents and get all your paperwork ready to roll, but the Hooksett School Board was not going to make a decision. So just want to make sure everybody knew that document is available. That's all online as well.
A parent was told by a teacher at Colley that they aren't allowed to write letters of recommendation. That's correct. For students that want to go to Londonderry or Bow or wherever.
Anywhere.
Private schools.
And-
Dr. Little.
So if you, could you
Any-
just repeat that?
Yeah, that a parent was told, she has a daughter at Colley looking to go to other schools, and she needed a letter of recommendation to apply to that school, and it's a public school, and the teachers were told by Mr. Benson that they have to halt all letters of recommendation because the school board hasn't decided on what's going to happen. So you can't even apply to these schools because you can't get a letter of recommendation from a teacher.
I have it in writing.
I have it in writing too.
Yeah, we have not heard that as a school board, and that's great new information that we just received from you. We did hear that some of the receiving schools were hesitant to make any kind of decision because we hadn't made a decision. But I hadn't heard that there'd been any changes here in Hooksett, so we'll certainly bring that up tomorrow night. Thank you.
And if anybody feels comfortable providing that, if you were given something in writing and you'd like to give that to me, I'd be happy to bring that up at the school board meeting. We'll bring it up either way, but in case somebody says, well, that's not true, or then I can produce something. So the next document I want you to look at, this is available on londonderry.org. It's a public site. And this was the memorandum of understanding that Londonderry School Board was going to be taking a look at. Now, what everybody should know is the details of this, all of these details that Londonderry is reviewing, you would think that before it actually went to Londonderry that the Hooksett School Board would get that and be able to go over it in detail and approve sending it to any of these schools. That did not happen. So the first time we saw this finalized memorandum of understanding that Londonderry is looking at was when it was posted on Londonderry's public website.
Londonderry has a charter?
Who wrote it?
Well, the attorney, we would assume, the attorney that's working with Hooksett on negotiations, but the board took a vote, as many of you may know, to not have any Hooksett School Board representation during any negotiations or any part of those negotiations. That's totally left up to the superintendent and the attorney.
There's a 3-2 vote.
Oh, it's a 3-2 vote.
We did.
We didn't. We're the two. Right.
John, I'm just curious, do you know, in years past, when we had the contract in 2003, if there were any school members who were part of the negotiation team?
I don't know the answer to that, right? Oh, David.
Yeah, that was Becky Burke.
So there was a school board representation in the negotiations the
Yes.
last time we did a school contract.
And what also happened on that was they would report back to the board in a non-public session and say, like, here's what's going on, and then the board could say, here's what we'd like. And I would say that happens with every teacher contract, support staff contract. I was on the negotiation committee for the teachers last year. There was 2 board members, plus the superintendent, plus the lawyer. So I think it was unprecedented that with such a large change, we were unrepresented.
And, during that discussion, I also pointed out to the board there was a recent negotiation that happened up in Concord. And there was, again, just search, you can Google, find these things in the press, that one of the board members was talking about their experience during negotiations. That was a school board member from Deerfield, I believe. So it's not uncommon for the school board to have representation, and it actually sometimes helps in the negotiation. The superintendent is coming at it from one angle, and they can go back and forth between the superintendent and the school board member in front of the person you're negotiating with. So it's helpful, actually. It's not trying to tell the superintendent how to do his job or anything else. I mean, you're all working for the benefit of the children you're representing. Is there somebody who has a question back here? No? Okay. So this is the memorandum of understanding. That's, again, it's public. I wanted just everybody could get out there, get a look. Oh, we have a question?
I'll wait. Keep going.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a long document, and I just highlighted some of the things that I think are important to look at. There's all kinds of legal jargon in here. The first one, though, that is to me very important is the student enrollment. And it says, if a student wishes to attend school, Londonderry agrees to enroll the student during any school years during the term as defined below, subject to the terms and conditions of the agreement, and provided that the total number of Hooksett students enrolled at any time during any school year shall not exceed 40 students per grade level. So that's, each of these MOUs should have something like this, a number. So that's going to be key, and each number is going to probably be different. It's going to be based upon the school that you're looking at, whether it's Bow, Pembroke, Londonderry. Each of them has a different number for different reasons that they're going to come up with in their MOU that we finally agree upon.
And to your point, sir, this does not say if the school chooses to send that student to Londonderry. It says if the student wants to go. So I haven't seen any criteria here that allows the school to be involved of saying which kids are going to go. I think there's another question.
So, just looking at this MOU, it states the number of 40 students per grade level. So is this going forward for 2014-15? Because if you look at the 2013, this one that you have here, there's 46 in grade 9.
Right. A little bit later on, I think it's number 7, it talks about grandfathered tuition. So they have an exception in there for students who are already enrolled.
Didn't they have 60 as a limit though this year? They had said they could have taken 60. Londonderry, wasn't it upper limit?
I don't
It was
know.
bigger than the
I heard
40.
that
That's
rumor.
what they said.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I saw in the paper.
That was in the paper.
But then they realized that was kind of high, so that's probably why they're coming down to 40.
Yeah, you got to remember, I had a conversation with the Londonderry superintendent on my own, just as a Hooksett parent. And the way he explained it to me and how he explained it to the board and the parents in in Londonderry is this. He said Londonderry had an aircraft ready to take off on the runway. And it had a certain number of seats that were still available. Now the Londonderry parents paid full price for their seats. And so he just said to them, I can fill those seats. It may not be the price you paid, but I'll be able to get you a price. And that's all extra money for our airline. Now with that extra money, I might be able to save some jobs, buy some computers, and that's why it was well accepted. It was about money. For them, it was a low amount. It was, whatever it was, $8,500. But there was another part of that, in the personal conversation with that superintendent. It was about the kids. There was a need. He knew there were some troubles going on at the time. And he's just trying to think about the kids. Let's get them into the school. He had capacity, or he had room without adding any extra staff, any extra resources, and he just made it work out. He couldn't take more. He couldn't take 100 kids, but he took what he could do for his school at the tuition that we were paying Manchester at the time.
With this airplane example that you're giving, does this mean that when we tuition our kids to Londonderry, that money is going to the school budget lines? School budget, or like Manchester, does it go to the general fund?
To be honest with you, I don't know each school district, what they do with that money, to be honest with you. I don't know. But the one thing I do want to say, though, the first year is different than the MOU. The MOU is now them planning, to have students come every year. Last year was just like, it was an oddity. It was just like, oh, there's a great number of students coming here asking if they can come. What do we have for room? And they said, well, we have this many seats. Because, their budget was already set, so they're just, we have the space, we have a need, and let's see if we can help out here. But this is different. This is planning, and these terms of the MOUs, there's no state mandated minimum, which is different than a tuition agreement. A tuition agreement has to be 10 years minimum. On an MOU, it can be as short or as long as the two parties want it to be. Generally speaking, it seems like 5 years seems to be a rough number people use because it's hard to plan out further than that. If you have a big development coming in, which is what's happening in Londonderry, they don't know when is that going to start activating. When are we going to start getting families that are going to be filling up some of these excess seats that we may have right now or that we can plan for. So they don't want to plan too far out with a long-term agreement.
To talk a little about your funding question, if they're an SB2 town, which I think Londonderry is, like Hooksett is, Hooksett has two separate government entities. We have the Hooksett School District and we have the Hooksett Town. And they do not cross over. So any money that's put into the Hooksett school budget stays there, spent there, and so forth. So Manchester is not. They're a city. They're Rich will correct me if I make a mistake here, but they're one big pot of money, and they decide where they're going to put that money. But we're not here. There's only one provision here. If we were to overspend our budget, we could tap the town's reserve, but it has to go to the Department of Revenue, and it's a very complicated process. So it's likely that the money that we send to Londonderry does go in their system. Rich Gerard.
Just a technical point, the tuition revenue that any town pays is a revenue that has to be assigned to the Manchester School District. So it doesn't show up in the general fund, but it's accounted for on the school district side of the ledger because Manchester is also a school district and a city. Once the Board of Aldermen makes their appropriation, they have complete control over it, but those revenues, school revenues, have to be assigned to the school.
You're not, in that there, you're not guaranteed 40 students a year, are you?
No.
That's just up to they could get. I mean, they could get 7, 8, whatever.
Right, so the question was, this 40 in this example that we're looking at, the Londonderry, the number 40, is that Hooksett guaranteeing 40 students a year? And the answer is no. That's Londonderry telling Hooksett this is the maximum number of children we can accept. So the problem comes if you have 50 children, right, that want to go to Londonderry. Only 40 are going to be allowed to go by this MOU. The decision of who goes and who doesn't go is up to the receiving district. Hooksett will have no part in that, which is different than JCB. In JCB, you come through here and you have to be approved to go to a school that's outside of the district. So that's a big difference between an MOU and JCB policy that people are mostly used to. Mr. Cody.
Londonderry could also tell you we're only going to take 5 kids this year, right? It's
No.
not just up to 40. I mean, 40 is the maximum, but every year, don't they look at what they can take, and they may only be able to take 10 or 20. That's the way I read it anyway.
No, I mean, it says,
Look at 3.
enrolled at any time during a school year shall not exceed 40
Right.
students per grade level.
But look at 3.
Right. So we're starting to skip ahead. We'll go through, try to go as logically as possible. So we get past student enrollment, so right now it's 40. The term, the key here is 5 years. That doesn't mean each of these MOUs is going to have the same term. It could, but it's not mandatory. Each town could have their own term with their MOU that we come to an agreement with. The enrollment process. By September 10th of the school year preceding the enrollment, the Londonderry School District shall provide the Hooksett School District with the number of spaces available for Hooksett students in the ensuing school year. So this is the point Tom's getting at. By October 1st of the year preceding the enrollment, Hooksett shall provide Londonderry with a list of students seeking Hooksett with a confirmation of enrollment. Each student listed on the confirmation of enrollment is referred to as the student or collectively students. This process shall not be applicable to students identified as eligible for special education. So it's actually a good point that Tom brings up, and it's worth talking about when we get to this point of reviewing the real MOU with Londonderry. You know, this may or may not be a term that's acceptable for Hooksett. That would be the will of the board, I suppose. I think you must be psychic. So there's more, you know, there's more stuff in there. If you read and you have questions about it, I'm just trying to point the major parts of the MOU that most people are very interested in. Number of students, term of the contract or term of the MOU, tuition. Each year of this agreement, Londonderry shall charge Hooksett as per pupil base tuition rate, which is the first year of the agreement shall be $10,290. So I find it interesting that in public we had a figure of $10,200, and in this proposed contract that Londonderry is reviewing, it's up to $10,290, which is closer to the Pinkerton number. That current tuition of Pinkerton is $10,292.
I wonder if Londonderry is going to change after they heard for our vote that we would go up to 10.4, because actually we're willing to pay more than they're charging. The other thing that I found interesting about the 10.4 number was that we're willing as a district to pay more for a child to go to a school we don't maintain than we're willing to put into a school that we do maintain. That's why one reason I couldn't go over the Manchester rate, because whatever your feelings are, Manchester is a high school maintained by Hooksett. So to me, they're the standard.
And it's key here, it says costs do not include the transportation of any student for any reason or any extraordinary educational costs such as special education services. So the key there is if you go to one of these MOU schools, you will be providing transportation to that MOU school. Now this year, Londonderry parents, a lot of them actually, the transportation service that provides transportation for Hooksett students came up with a fairly affordable way for parents to have a bus here, picks them up at Cawley, brings them down to Londonderry, and then picks them up at the end of the day and drops them off again at Cawley. It's not a perfect solution though, because you, the parent, or through your neighbors are carpooling, have to get that child over here to Cawley Middle School at 6:30, by 6:30 in the morning, I think is when that bus leaves. And then in the afternoon, you know, for working parents, it's tough, because if those kids get out of school at Londonderry at 2 o'clock, you got to be here at 2:30 to pick them up. We have a hand raised. 6:15, so.
6:10.
Yeah, so I mean the key here is that all of these decisions should take a lot of thought. They should have a lot of public input, because 5 people cannot think of all the scenarios and how they affect everybody's life differently. If you're both working parents, it's gonna be a different scenario than if you're a single mom or a single dad. So it really, the public input is so important for us to hear what is how does this hit people in the real world, and what haven't we thought about? Number 7 is, I thought, was fairly important. It says grandfathered tuition, notwithstanding paragraph 5 above, that talks about equal access. Hooksett students who are attending the Londonderry School District during the 2013-14 school year shall be charged a base tuition rate equal to the base tuition rate charged by the school district operating Hooksett's high school of record in the current and succeeding school years until graduation or withdrawal. So it's kind of interesting, because the board, as David just said, talked about setting the base tuition at a base rate that's potentially higher than our contracted rate with Manchester right now, which also could mean that we're going to be paying that higher tuition to all of these surrounding schools as well. So as David said, we're going to be paying more money to the surrounding schools than our school district of record, Manchester. It doesn't seem right. Number 8, supplemental tuition. In addition to the base tuition, Hooksett agrees to pay supplemental special education tuition for each student identified as needing special education services, whether such services are provided during the academic school year or extended school year. So I think it's important that if you have a special needs child, there are going to be exceptions, whether it's in a long-term contract or these MOUs, that Hooksett will take care of those special education students, and the receiving schools are going to require that as well. So, I don't know, is there anything else that's really... Yeah, I had termination. If anybody has any questions on the other ones, we can talk about it too. Just try to go through this as quickly as possible. Termination. The agreement terminates at the end of the term or by mutual agreement. Upon termination of the agreement, in any event, Londonderry agrees to allow any student who is enrolled on the date of termination to continue attending the school until graduation from the school, subject to applicable graduation requirements and the laws of the state of New Hampshire, provided that the Hooksett timely pays any tuition due under the terms of this agreement, which the term parties agree shall survive termination with respect to such students. Notwithstanding, the parties shall meet not less than 90 days prior to the expiration of this agreement to discuss the possible extension thereof. So if your child happens to be going to this school and we terminate, they're basically saying the child will be allowed to continue and finish out their high school career, which, again, most of these people are thinking about the kids, you know, which is good. And that's the key points. Does anybody have any questions or want to talk about some of the Londonderry ones? Is the microphone floating around?
It's right here.
Hi, John. So I realize that this is something that was just up on Londonderry's site, right? It might not be the final one that you guys get presented with tomorrow. It might be different from town to town, but when I read this, I found 3 things that were just glaringly needed to be discussed, and I want you to take this into consideration when you do have the final ones presented to you tomorrow night. So the first one is there's nothing in here about the school district having to report back to us about how our kids are doing in those schools. I know that was a real sticking point with us with Manchester, so I would think we would want to have something built in to our MOUs with schools going forward.
Yeah, just 2 things. First, just to correct you, Jessica, we are not anticipating getting these tomorrow night.
Oh, when you do get them then.
Well, I have heard nothing today saying that we're going to get them. The other thing is I did bring up your question, because I know you had posed this question to me about the reporting. It was I was under the impression that that was going to be in there from our initial discussion, and it is not. So we are going to try to talk about that.
Yeah. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, when I looked on the website, I think they're presenting it to Londonderry parents tomorrow. You're not getting it. This is just as a copy. It's not final. If you go onto Londonderry High School, it says that they're presenting it.
So we believe this is the final?
No.
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 No, that's what they're presenting to the parents tomorrow night in the Londonderry School.
It could change.
It could change, right? But it's probably the most final one that they have
That I don't know.
right now, so we don't know. So
Hooksett won't have it to answer your question.
all right, well, whenever you do have it, I think reporting is key, right? We don't want to miss that. The second thing is when you look at this enrollment process, it's already gone by for this year. So I think the public needs to remember that any of these MOUs are not going to help you for next year. They won't help you until the following year, right? This is already passed, all of these dates.
So we haven't had those discussions yet with Londonderry or Bow or Pembroke.
Okay.
So what we have had a board that has voted to delay any decisions on what we do have for policy, which is JCB.
Which, don't get me started on that one, John.
And let me just say this, Jessica. Even though that Londonderry one is on the website, we don't have it as a board. And
Right.
we have only had confidential discussions, which we cannot repeat here.
Okay.
So we are at a loss to even confirm or deny to you that we have had discussions about some of this stuff because we don't want to breach that confidentiality.
And I fully respect that. I'm just saying if you.
I do too, but I
haven't
don't
thought about
understand
this-
it. That's the problem.
Yeah, I don't understand why some of those things were thought of. So, and then my last point is, in both section 6 and section 7, there was a big discussion about the language of a high school of record and whether or not that was a legal term. And I believe Dr. Littlefield said that it needed to be a school maintained by the district. And this MOU mentions that twice. So if that's not a legal term, perhaps it should be fixed somehow to comply with what we believe is the legal ease for contracts going forward. So that's it.
Thank you, very good point.
I'm only slightly confused again. If Manchester's going to be the maintained school till 2018, then if you have a contract till with Pinkerton, what happens then to Manchester?
Do you want? So the question is, if I understand it correctly, if we have a maintained school of record with Manchester till 2018, what does it all mean now if we have a contract with Pinkerton, right? So I think the easiest way to think about it is look at Manchester. You know, they have multiple schools of record, and they have different policies or procedures on how they direct children to those different schools.
Okay.
So we would have 2 schools, Manchester and Pinkerton, and we'd have to come up with some criteria on how we decide which students go to which school.
All right, all right.
And the board has yet to make that decision. That, in our opinion, is the decision that should be made at the front end, because that's the hardest work to do. And if you can get through that, then you can entertain contracts. But if you can't decide how are you going to do this with a town like Hooksett, you know, is it going to be by geography? Is it going to be by tradition? You want to go to Manchester schools? I mean, so it's a tough question to answer, and this board keeps kicking that can down the road.
Can you have 2 high schools of record?
Yes. We've been told that you can have 2 high schools of record, and
You
we
can
can
maintain-
assign to whichever.
Wait, I just want to be clear. You can maintain 2 different high schools in 2 different districts.
That's what we've been told. And we could assign as we wanted to. One of the criteria that the board set forth of who they wanted to contract with versus MOUs was that the high school would be able to take all of the Hooksett students. So there's really only 2 possibilities, Pinkerton and Manchester, because none of the other high schools in the immediate area had the capacity. So that's kind of why we're down to those 2 as far as contracts go.
Rich Girard?
How is this not a contract? I mean, I've been taking a look at RSA 193.3. It talks about students being able to individually do what you said earlier, enter into agreements with districts. If your district is officially ratifying an agreement with another district so that kids can go there if they want, how is this not a tuition contract?
So I think it's not a tuition agreement. The difference, there's a few differences. Tuition agreements are a 10-year minimum. I also believe that, as somebody, Tom, I think pointed out tonight in the MOU, there's really no guarantee in there. They do have a number of 40 for this example we're looking at that says that's their max that they can take. But they also said that every year they're going to come up with a number. I think that was section 6. No.
The other thing that was explained to us was that under an MOU, the school cannot assign to that school. So it has to be initiated by the parents and not the school. I will say this, Rich, I would not feel that we were given a clear contrast between what an MOU and what a contract is. It was more of us asking questions and answers being given that says, well, that would make it a contract or that would not make it a contract. So I can't answer all that criteria. The one that stuck out to me was the assignment, that the school can't assign under an MOU.
And that's probably why you don't have reporting requirements in there.
I believe so. And the reason, and the fact that we don't have reporting requirements doesn't mean that the schools can't report to us and that we can't collaborate with them as far as reporting.
So my question, if you have 40 students here and 45 kids apply, who decides?
Well, I think that is the question to be answered. If you read the MOU, the only thing that it says that it involves the school is to provide a list to the school of who is interested. So I guess the question becomes, does Hooksett pare down that list from 45 to 40?
But you can't though, because it's not a contract.
Right, and I would also say that then we are not providing a list to the school of the children that are interested. Because if the children are interested, numbers 50, it numbers 50. If the number that they can take is 40, it doesn't change the fact that there's 50 kids interested, and that's what it states in this agreement. Also, the fact that the school can't assign, I would argue then, can our school not assign either? I wouldn't think if we don't have the power to assign, I don't see how we would have the power to restrict the assignment. So these are the things that need to be talked about. They need to be talked about in public. Part of the problem, not a problem, but part of what goes on is we go into a confidential, non-public session, and then we're not supposed to talk to you folks about what we found out in there, and that has been a subject of recent controversy. So it makes it very difficult. But we can take all of your questions and go back into that session, and that's what's been very valuable already tonight, is exactly those things.
Does anybody have any more questions or comments about the MOU?
John, I do, I guess.
Okay, Tom.
Okay, go ahead, Bill. Oh,
No, I can just say I'm frustrated, that's all.
thanks. John's frustrated.
Oh, with an 8th grade, this is just aggravating to me.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. So are you saying you don't know if you can set criteria for assigning students? If, say, if there's 45, you've talked about criteria, whether it's a lottery or brother and sister, or is that...
It's supposed to be discussed at the next Hooksett School Board meeting.
Whether you can do it or not, or what the criteria will be?
Setting criteria, but I think what's going to come up in that discussion is some of the points that were brought up tonight. I think the focus has been on that main Pinkerton contract that they keep talking about, and less focus on the MOUs. It's almost like the MOUs are just this little sidebar, but these are great questions that we need to explore as a board and make sure we can come up with an answer together, so that when a parent comes to us or comes to the superintendent, they're ready with an answer, not, well, we haven't decided that yet, but we just signed these agreements. That's not the position you want to put yourself in.
Tom, I would think we're all in agreement that we can set the criteria for any of those kids that want out of a required contract number. And that's where a lot of our focus, as John said. If Pinkerton says you have to send so many, then the board can come up with that. Whether we can come up with a criteria of who can go to an MOU school, I don't think that we can, from the way I read it here. I think we basically have to take that list, maybe we keep it in priority of when the kids asked, and I think we have to give that list to the school, because that's what this says that we're supposed to do. It doesn't say that we're supposed to add that criteria.
So this sounds like it's becoming first come, first served. I mean, I have a 7th grade daughter. Should I get my paperwork ready? I'm being facetious a little bit, but I don't see how we rectify all this.
But it's worse for the 8th graders. Because
Exactly.
they're going to apply to the school, we can't even get a recommendation. There's nothing we can do but sit here and wait and put all the ducks.
Well, the way I read the MOU, it would, I mean, and we go back to it, it just says that as far as the school district, we will provide that list of interested students to them. It doesn't say that that number has to be under what they're asking for, or they will allow, or anything like that. So I would have to agree with, I wouldn't say it means first come, first serve. It means to me, they have to decide. Once we provide those names, they have to decide.
I did go visit Londonderry, and they did say that they turned away some kids last year. That's what I was told. The ones that came in March and April, they already had filled the seats, so those kids, I don't know what happened to them.
Just to that point, it is a little different last year versus this year, and the reason I say that is because, last year, budgets were already passed, those were just available seats, so they didn't have to hire any more teachers, or, this is more planned, trying to plan for this number of students that come in every year, so this is going to be more of a budgeted item, and that's why there are dates in here that Hooksett has to satisfy, so that if Hooksett has a large number to these various MOUs, that they can budget that money to maybe hire some new teachers or get some more computers. So it is a little bit different than last year. Last year was just, we had these extra seats and we got enough kids, and then we ran out of those seats. I'm sorry, the bus is full.
It sounds to me like, it's not you guys, obviously by opening up this forum, it sounds to me like the rest of the school board doesn't want to face some of the issues and almost perhaps wants to push it off to maybe the next school board, and not address the problems.
There's nothing that legally says that we have to come up with any criteria before we accept anything. But I think morally we do. I think we need to tell the parents how we're going to make decisions, and I think we need to make sure that we have the right to make those decisions. We are in overtime right now, trying to get this done this year. John and I made a motion to push this whole thing off till next year, use JCB this year, our assignments with Manchester, and talk about this for the whole year. That was voted down.
3-2?
Yeah, 3-2.
Hey, you guys lost.
John and I also tried to start this process in June, and the concept of multi-contract was told to be too complicated, and we couldn't do it. So this didn't even really get started till September. And we didn't hire our lawyer until late in September. So he had to come up to speed. I think he's very capable, but he's been thrown right in the middle of something and trying to get it all done now before the very last minute. And I'm just concerned, I'm not so concerned with the MOUs because they're 5 years, we can get out of them. But haven't we learned our lesson about a long-term contract? We paid big time to get out of Manchester, whether you wanted to stay in or get out. We did, we paid to get out. Why do we jump into another 10-year restrictive contract? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And as we get onto Pinkerton, maybe we're talking about Pinkerton now, I don't know.
Can you do an MOU with Pinkerton?
If they agreed to it.
Right, so what has been publicly discussed with the board, everybody has seen, if you've come to the school board meetings, the idea is a tuition agreement with Pinkerton, and then MOU agreements with the schools Bow, Pembroke, and Londonderry. I have personally brought up on social media, on Hooksett Issues, Google group, the idea of an MOU with Pinkerton as well. The idea being this, to Dave's point, he just talked about whether or not you're a Manchester supporter or not, we just paid over $1 million+ to get out of a long-term contract. Why on God's green earth would we get into another long-term contract? First of all, I'm not saying anything bad about Pinkerton. I've toured there, my son toured there, it's a wonderful school. I support the parents that want to go to Pinkerton. What I don't support is Hooksett, in my opinion, experimenting with sending large groups of students to Pinkerton. It's not a local school district, just as my son goes to Londonderry. It's a distance. There's more than just a school you have to think about with your child. You have to think about the extracurricular activities. What does that mean to you? You have to pick your son up after school, your daughter up at school. What time does your son or daughter have to get up in the morning to catch the bus? We'll talk about transportation a little bit later. Homework. How long is it going to take your child to do their homework once they get home from school? After they do their extracurricular activities. So all of these things, you have to add that chunk of time in the middle now of transportation. And what happens if your child misses the bus? Do you have enough time to get your child to school and then get to your job? You know, these are real life situations that Hooksett residents have to contemplate. And I don't think we're giving the Hooksett residents enough time to contemplate that. But it is what it is right now.
One of the things that kept me away from a couple things that kept me away from the Pinkerton contract. One, parents say, by dividing the kids up, it splits up the community. And, you know, I guess it does, but unless we build a high school here, I don't think we can change that. But isn't it going to divide us more if there's only a certain amount of kids that get out of that option? And how is that all going to happen? If only X number of kids that are allowed not to go to Pinkerton have to basically compete for those slots or make up super reasons not to go. I just don't think that's going to work well for our community. So that's one reason. The other reason is if you look at the surrounding high schools, I did a graphic on this. In 10 years, they're going to be down about 1,000 students. Pinkerton alone loses 500 by projections. So for a town that doesn't have a high school, that's surrounded by a lot of grade schools, whose enrollments are going down, being a free agent has a lot of advantages right now. When we signed the 2003 contract, that was not the case. There were very few seats around. That's why we had to go to the capital cost to expand Central to be able to hold the capacity. But that's all changed, and the projections have changed. Particularly if we work in 5-year increments, then we could see something, if the trend changes and things start to fill up, well, we might want to be making decisions at that point that are different than we're making now. But I have publicly stated I will not support a contract with Pinkerton that has any restrictive number. I just don't think it's wise at this point. I don't think it's been thought out, and I personally don't look forward to trying to come up with that criteria that says, you know, your child goes and your child doesn't go based on a formula that we come up with. So that's kind of my personal feeling about it.
So we don't have a lot of public data for you for the Pinkerton contract. One thing we do have, are we up there yet?
I gotta catch up because I went back. Go ahead, I'll catch up.
Okay. So again, Google, great tool. Just start searching for names, schools, and you come up, this one here, it's dated August 29th. I just highlighted a few of the things that caught my eye about it. But the first thing that caught my eye, it said Auburn's 250 students are an important reason enrollment is stable. Now, I think most Hooksett residents are aware we are part of a 3-member school district, SAU 15, and the members are Hooksett, Candia, and Auburn. So Auburn is already going to Pinkerton. Now that process took them roughly 2 years. And the community was behind this. The community was almost pushing the school board. I was talking the other night to one of the school board members. So totally different situation. They had experience with Pinkerton. They wanted to go there. They're in closer proximity to the school. It's right in their backyard. So that's a whole different scenario. But you can see in this public statement that it provided stability to Pinkerton. And I think we're at another one of those inflection points right now. As David said, there's declining enrollments. I was part of the tour that went down there and speaking to the headmaster as well as one of the board members who came around on the tour with us. He said the other thing, came right out and said it, declining enrollments, they're very aware of that. They also talked about charter schools. So the first charter school opened up in Derry. It's a small one, it's not much, but it is drawing students away. They're not the only school that has to think about this in the state of New Hampshire. This is happening all around us. So it's a unique part of time we're involved in right now. But my point all along has been, Hooksett should be in the driver's seat with this. We should not have to be getting into long-term contracts to provide opportunities for our kids. I think if we negotiate properly, there's no reason at all we shouldn't be able to negotiate an MOU with Pinkerton, and then allow the data to tell us where this community is going to go. If the data shows us they continue to go to Manchester, so be it. We already have a 100-year history. We'll work with them side by side at improvements. If it shows us that everybody flocks out of Hooksett and goes to Pinkerton, we'll support that data too. But I'm not a firm believer in driving data. I'm a firm believer in providing the opportunities, and then you let the families and the children tell you where they're having the best experiences, and those are the school districts who we want to support and work together with.
I just wanted to interject one piece of information that we confirmed today about Pinkerton. And we got this by talking to, John was actually talking to somebody from Auburn. A big deal has been that if we got a contract with Pinkerton, we get representation on the Board of Trustees. A school board member from Auburn said that's not all it's cracked up to be, because there will be a person on the Board of Trustees that lives in the town, but he represents Pinkerton's interest. So that was confirmed by the superintendent today. So he can go and talk to our school board and talk to the trustees, but his primary focus is to be a trustee of Pinkerton, not a representative of Hooksett. So I think it's important, because that's been one of the big things about, it was with Manchester, you know, could we get representation and so forth. So when I heard that, I thought that does take a little bit of that punch out of that representation.
So the other part I had highlighted here is quoting Underhill. That's Skip Underhill. Great guy down there. I mean, he's a big promoter of Pinkerton, and he's been doing this forever. But he said, it's well known that enrollment trends mean there will eventually be a decline in the number of students coming to Pinkerton from Auburn, Chester, Derry, and Hampstead. Those are the current sending districts. So attendance by Hooksett students could fill in a projected gap, depending, of course, on what the Hooksett School Board decides to do for its students. At the bottom there, I got just a little personal note, because something caught my eye, and it talked about the meeting with the headmaster Anderson and Hooksett School Board Superintendent Littlefield and other Hooksett personnel now attending a meeting. And so I was concerned with that, because the school board was not made aware of any other Hooksett personnel attending at these negotiations. So first of all, I followed up with the newspaper, and they couldn't confirm it, said the notes were long gone. I spoke directly with Mary Anderson. She said there were no other Hooksett personnel, and I also confirmed that with Dr. Littlefield. So that is a misprint, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that. The second page, while enrollment trends are down from the sending towns, including 100 fewer students coming from Derry, Pinkerton's overall enrollment is up, Underhill said. This is because Auburn will come this fall with 250 more students. Underhill noted that more sending towns could mean lower tuition. The greater the divisor, the cheaper it gets, he said. The fewer students we have, the more tuition goes up. So I just take a pause when I read something like that. Our job on the Hooksett School Board is to represent the Hooksett parents and the best interest of the Hooksett children. Our job is not to represent the best interest of any of these districts that we send the children to. That's their job, that's their school board. So I'm a little concerned with this, because it's basically saying if Hooksett sends a large number of volumes to Hooksett or to Pinkerton, that's going to be good for Pinkerton. It's also going to be good for those districts that are currently sending if enrollments start going down. So our number increase will help their tuition keep stable. There's another side of that coin, though, because again, private conversations with some of these sending districts, school board members, they look at it as it's not so great for them because it could mean fewer opportunities for their students, more competition. Hooksett children, Auburn, Chester student, all competing for positions on teams, for sports, positions inside of clubs, let's say, for president, vice president, that type of stuff. So it's not always a positive light that the other districts are going to be looking at an influx of large Hooksett students. The other thing I have highlighted here, Derry School Board Chairman Brenda Willis pointed out that Derry doesn't have a say in whom Pinkerton signs up for ascending town. So when I read things like this, I feel a little contention in Derry about some of these sending towns. But I've heard that at our board meetings. Sometime somebody pointed out you should read the Londonderry school board meeting record, and they were pointing out somebody made some, or a town meeting, somebody made some poor comment about sending districts, and a lot of that you have to take with a grain of salt, because just like at our school board meetings or Manchester school board meetings, you're going to get people that show up and are going to give you their opinion. It doesn't mean that represents the whole town. So I always say be careful when people take one line and want to represent the whole town with it. Either way. Willis says it's a hard pill for parents to swallow. There are only so many slots. Willis emphasized that she wasn't speaking about Derry, but for the other sending schools whose students may also miss opportunities if the school gets too big. That's what I was just talking about. Hampstead School Board Chairwoman Natalie Gallo said she has an overriding concern that there has been a distinct lack of communication over this issue, and she has heard nothing about it from Pinkerton. So again, that's the communication between the town of Derry School Board and Pinkerton Academy itself. So there, you can take this with a grain of salt, but there is a little bit of contention going on there. And I have a concern of adding additional students to an already large student body, she said. While I laud Pinkerton's initiative to expand their programs, i.e. CTE, I question the inclusion of an additional substantial enrollment from Hooksett. I feel this will erode our Hampstead students' opportunities in both academic and scholastic challenges. So the point with all of this is there's information out there that's publicly available. Take it in, research it, look it in. When we have information, we're definitely going to provide it. The problem is right now with the Pinkerton contract, we have very little that we can provide.
Well, before we go, I just would like people to know what timeline we have that we know about. Tomorrow night we'll meet in this room at 6:30, hopefully to hammer out all of these criteria questions and so forth.
There are a couple more things we just want to touch base on.
Okay, I didn't know if we're losing people here at all times. So, the board has a propensity to end meetings by 9:30, so, if we can get this done in 2 hours, I guess it'll be done. I'm not that hopeful. There's a meeting scheduled for the 25th, which is the Monday of Thanksgiving week, which is supposed to be a public forum, which clearly the school board felt that they would have voted on these. They would have already voted on all of this, and they were going to inform the public. I'm not sure that meeting will actually take place at this point. There was another forum that was canceled by the majority of the school board because they didn't feel the timing was right. So December 3rd is the next meeting. So if we don't vote tomorrow night, which I don't anticipate that we would, the next real opportunity would be December 3rd, that we would be voting on these MOUs and all of this stuff. I think John and I made it pretty clear. Well, I don't want to speak for John, but I'm not supporting a Pinkerton contract with a restrictive number, and I have some serious questions about these MOUs, and I don't think we've worked through them yet. So that's all I got.
Just got a couple extra slides here. I'm going to quickly go through them. Just talk about the hard data numbers.
Hey, Rick,
That's okay.
appreciate your time tonight.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. Have a cookie on your way out.
Ken Shear over here, he likes data.
He likes it, yeah.
He'll like that.
All right, so this first chart, we'll go over this quickly. It's in the handouts over there. This was handed out at an October school board meeting, but It's a lot of people talk about the numbers at these various high schools. So this is a kind of good sheet to take home with you to give you a good idea of where Hooksett students are, grades 9 through 12. And it's an interesting, look. If you go on the next slide, you can look at it graphically. And to me, when I looked at it graphically, the surprising number I looked at for Hooksett freshmen. Now, arguably, last year was the toughest year Manchester has had in a long time, but still, 50% of Hooksett parents chose Manchester. Okay, so that's a pretty strong statement, and I believe it's data that's being ignored currently by this board. So out of all of us, we get a 50% breakdown at Manchester, 32% in Londonderry, 10% at Pinkerton, and then 5% Trinity, 3% Pembroke, and then in very small numbers after that. It's just glaring to me, though, that 50% still chose Manchester. And we, as a board, since the beginning of school this year, have not even asked Manchester for updates on any of this data that we were gathering so closely last year. So I asked, why is that? And I'll answer myself sometimes, and I say, well, maybe it's because we don't want to know the answer if that's not our target. The answer may be we fixed these problems, or we fixed some of them and we're working towards fixing some of the others. So one of the motions I recently brought up at the school board, and it surprisingly passed, was to gather some of this data. So we should be receiving that back from Manchester soon. The next graph to look at is overall, not that one there was just the freshmen. This is overall. We still send 71% of Hooksett students to Manchester, 12% to Trinity, 8% to Londonderry, 4% to Pinkerton. So in the first graph, we send 10% to Pinkerton, second graph, 4%, but this board is now pushing for a contract with Pinkerton. The data doesn't line up with it, and I'm sure there are reasons behind it for them, but it just doesn't make any sense. One of the last sheets here is a bus proposal we just looked at. You can look at these. The first one was crossed off because they decided they didn't need 6 buses. They think they can do it in 4. The crazy thing about this for me is we did have some discussion about this one night, and we went back and forth on options 2, 3, and 4, and we couldn't decide as a board. So they rolled right into the next motion, which was a motion to allocate the money to spend on the buses at the tune of $189,000. So they approved the buses without even being able to come to an agreement on how the children could use the buses.
And if I can add one thing to that one. If you look at number 4, it says pick up all the kids at Collie and take them down. You're not going to need 4 buses for that, because you're not going to have 4 buses of freshmen going to Pinkerton. So that's where we thought this was kind of a premature vote.
And for me, the big one is I just look at all these plans and I try to think of how this affects a family. The first option, number 2, I say if the first pickup is at 5:45, this would be a route that actually came around to the neighborhoods. So I got to think about if my child's catching a bus at 5:45, they got to get up, have breakfast, get their stuff together, maybe grab a shower. You're talking about a child getting up at 5:15 after staying up the night before doing homework. It doesn't make logical sense to me. So there's the proposal. Take a look at it, see if it makes logical sense to you. It didn't to the board that night because they couldn't come to a decision. Question, Deb?
Sure, about this whole thing. You guys are making good points, and what can we do? I mean, it's going to be 3-2. I don't understand.
Show up tomorrow.
Yeah, but it's still not going to affect the board. The board's still going to be 3-2.
But you can apply, I don't know, I think this is still America. You can still apply political pressure. You can apply political pressure to your representatives, which is the school board, all of us. You can apply pressure to your superintendent that represents represents the Hooksett children and does the work that the school board requests. So you can apply political pressure. You can write letters. You can write letters in numbers, though. I think the problem right now is Hooksit's kind of like a sleeping giant, you know? And I think a lot of people think, well, you know what, this really doesn't matter what these nuts are doing every week, arguing, fighting, because in March, I'm going to vote this whole thing down. And I think what you're starting to learn is you may vote something down, but something may happen that you hadn't planned on happening. You never thought that a board could do the things it's doing right in front of your noses.
Debbie, I would answer your question. I think the most reasonable thing at this point would be asked to delay this 1 year, because we don't have all the information. And I think that would be a compromise position at this point to kind of plan what we're going to do. There will be a change in the board in March, hopefully.
You can't show up tomorrow night. Would you send the email to you?
I would email them, and I mean, if that's the way you feel, I feel this should be delayed, because until we really know what is going on and so forth, and you know, we haven't been included. I mean, we're finding out a lot of our information from other sources than our own negotiations and so forth. So,
what's the downside to delaying? I guess is my question. Versus, there's much more downside than upside.
I guess the only downside I could see is that normally Pinkerton only allows 75 out-of-district students. So if there's a big contingency here in Hooksett that wants to go to Pinkerton this year, they would have competition for those seats. Other than that, I don't really see one. Our JCB policy probably serves us just as well as these MOUs. Different schools have different criteria to get in, but I've never heard it be a big issue. It's mostly space, and that's what's going to be in there. So we've settled our differences with Manchester, so we're not having any issues with them this next year. So I don't see a downside to it, and it has been suggested, and I think I can say this publicly. The superintendent said you could push this all back a year.
It worked well this year for most parents. They got the choice they wanted this year. Why not do it for another year?
I also think when you look at the trend, it's going in our favor. If you look at it purely for negotiations, if enrollments are going down, we should have more power next year than we had this year, because we have a large number of students, and because of the proximity, they want to go to some of these different schools. You know, if you're over on Hackett Hill, there's a lot of convenience to going to Bow or Pembroke, you know, distance-wise. So there's a lot of reasons, but that's what I would ask for.
The other thing to remember too is part of that negotiated or the mediated agreement with Manchester is that base tuition number went up to 10.2. So for those families that might have been on the fence about going to Pinkerton or going to Bow because it was too expensive, that difference that the families would pay, that difference just became a lot smaller because we're paying that base tuition to Manchester, which is higher this year. So I agree with David. There is no reason at all this decision has to be rushed like it's being rushed right now. But we've proposed it. It just gets shot down.
I know for a fact Pinkerton has been accepting names and applications, even though that they've not been getting letters of recommendations. So parents have been applying to Pinkerton. They're the only school that has been accepting.
I don't know what to say.
Just to add one other thing, if we would delay 1 year, when we were under our contract with Manchester, we did not promote or encourage any other schools. That was part of it. The agreement now is very clear. We're free to do what we want. We paid for that freedom. So we could make more people aware of JCB. We could make more people aware of who's accepting how many. The school board could actually be helpful now in that. Prior to this, because of the contract, we really had to stay away from all of that stuff. We had to wait until you, the parent, discovered what you wanted to do and then come back. And I would say the same thing for Manchester. You know, Manchester has shown that they're willing to compete without a minimum. I think Pinkerton could do the same thing. If Pinkerton thinks they're a great school, put it on the table and see who comes. That's what Manchester has done. Yes, we paid them, but that's over, and they're willing to say, send one or send them all. And I think, you know, that's good competition.
So just probably wrap up. I mean, if you have any more questions or comments, definitely we'll take them. But this is a selfish plug because this is not an official school board meeting. But the last sheet here, just trying to promote. I'm trying to promote, and I know David supports this as well, the Hooksett Kettle campaign. Volunteers helping out, if you can, volunteer some time. On Facebook, they have a Hooksett Salvation Army webpage. You can sign up, and it's a really great experience for you and your family. You go out and ring the bells for an hour or two, and it's just a great way to give back to the community and the families around Hooksett. And it's really important. We're one of the only volunteer Salvation Army ringing that do ringing, and the difference is, I want to say 80% of the money that gets raised, if you're all volunteer, stays in Hooksett, versus if they can't get enough volunteers and they have to hire them, you only get 5%. Is that right? 5 or 10%. It's a small number. So it's key that they get enough volunteers. I have a fun match challenge going on right now, and this is out at that Hooksett.net site. And in about a week, I just basically said I'd be willing to donate $300 of my Hooksett stipend for a school board if I could get matching donations totaling $300. In less than a week, residents from Manchester, Hooksett, Dunbarton, Bow, I think I covered all the towns, donated small amounts, and we're over 325 in less than a week. So by that, I donated 300 plus, I matched the 300 and then an extra 200 to meet that goal. So $500 of the stipend. So now we had a different problem. Thank you, Dave. We had a different problem now. We had to set a new goal. So our new goal is $2,000 together to try to raise by December 21st. So I just put it out there, spread the word. And this is for the Hooksett Salvation Army Kettle campaign.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Have a cookie.